Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to today's live stream with the Science Friday Book Club. My apologies that we're getting started just a moment or two late. I was having such a lovely discussion with our guests today, so I think you're all in for a wonderful time. My name is Sandy, and I'm the Science Friday Education Program Manager. Thanks again for joining us. I am coming from Northwest New Jersey, and I would love to know, where are you joining us from? So if you haven't already, and I see many folks have, be sure to drop your comments into the chat and let us know where you're from. If you are signed into a YouTube account, you should be able to see the chat either on the right side or below this video, and you can let us know where you're watching from today. If you don't already know us, I like to say that Science Friday is your one-stop shop for all things science news. We're very well known for our weekly science radio show broadcast every week on, you guessed it, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. But you can listen to us live on your local radio station by visiting sciencefriday.com, or get our podcast, our daily podcast, wherever you like to get your podcasts. And we have so much more. We also have a variety of articles, educational activities, community experiences like this one, all meant for people who love science or who want to just learn more about the world. But today, we're here to discuss this month's book club pick, Why We Die, by Venki Ramakrishnan. Giant strides right now are being made in why we age and why some species live longer than others. Folks want to know, can we eventually cheat disease and death and live for a very, very long time, possibly many times our current lifespan? And we are going to dig into those questions very soon. Please don't forget that you can keep this conversation going after the live stream at our Science Friday Book Club online community space hosted on Mighty Networks. You can join at the link in the chat. Before we get started, quick reminders. Science Friday is committed to providing a welcoming and harassment-free environment for members of all ethnicities, ages, genders and gender identities, sexual orientations, physical abilities, national origins, beliefs, and any other dimension of diversity. We've created a code of conduct to help us create a safe and positive community experience for all, and you can read it in its entirety on the community space I just mentioned. And because we believe in providing very clear expectations as a necessary part of building a respectful community, here are the basics. Be supportive and respectful when speaking with one another or asking questions in the chat. Share generously and listen closely. You can add your thoughts or ideas throughout the conversation in the chat, even if they aren't strictly questions for the guest. We're going to do our best to stay on topic today and discuss this month's book club pick and related topics. And we reserve the right to ban anyone who engages in demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior today. Thanks for sticking with me. I know that's a lot, but it is time to welcome our special guest for today's live stream. Please join me by posting your emoji of choice in the chat to welcome him. And here we go. Venki Ramakrishnan shared the Nobel Prize in 2009 for chemistry for his work on one of the central problems in molecular biology, namely how genetic information is read to make the proteins they specify. He was president of the Royal Society, one of the oldest scientific organizations in the world, and was knighted in 2012. Ramakrishnan is the author of 2 books. The first, The Gene Machine, is a memoir about his quest for the structure of the ribosome. And his most recent book, which we're going to talk about today, is Why We Die, the new science of aging and the quest for immortality, which is all about the biology of aging and death. Venki, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. As a reminder to our audience, we want your questions. You can drop them right into the chat, which is giving me a little trouble. So, there it is. I don't know why sorry about that. I just want to be able to see your comments. I'm so sorry, technical difficulties. At any time during events, make sure you put your questions or comments for our guests in the chat, and we're going to try and get to as many of them as possible. We have our wonderful moderator, Taylor, who is in that chat, keeping track of everything for you folks. All right, let us jump right in because there have been so many questions in our group. You have had, or actually, before we even get started, Would you be willing to do a reading for us? Do you happen to have your book with you?
Oh, no, I don't
If
have
not,
it
it's
with me. I'm sorry.
I always ask
I
if I
wasn't
forgot.
expecting it.
No worries. I forgot to ask you before we started, and I always want to give that opportunity. So
If
we're,
I had a plum voice like Stephen Fry or something, then it would be worth it. You know.
I don't know, I think, and I love your accent, and it was so funny. I didn't realize that you actually lived in America before moving to the UK. So I'm just enjoying your voice very much. Don't think that you have anything to worry about. Um, so you have obviously had an incredibly impressive career. As a chemical biologist, the ribosome is so important to everything that happens in our body. So I'm just curious why, as a Nobel-winning molecular biologist, known for ribosomes and those kinds of cellular processes, what drew you to the science of aging and death and longevity? And was there a personal experience or just an aha moment that gave you the motivation to write this book?
Yeah, no, there were several reasons. One is my own field of how cells make proteins is actually very centrally connected to the problem of aging, because one of the causes, one of the drivers of aging is that process breaks down. The process of making proteins at just the right amount and the right time, and with controlling the quality of the proteins made, all of that stuff breaks down, and it's one of the drivers of aging. So many people in my field of protein synthesis are actually do work directly on aging. And many of the interventions for aging actually affect how the ribosome initiates translating mRNA to make proteins. So it's very interconnected. Ribosome aging is fundamentally, it's a biological process, and underlying it all is molecular biology. So it's not that far from my own field. Now, why I would write it is it has some different motivations. One is, I think for the first time in several decades, we have a lot of information on why we age, all the processes of aging. It's not just random decay. It's several processes that break down, and we're understanding these processes allows us to think about intervening in them. That's one reason. So we're at a very exciting stage in biology. The other is that societies are changing. People are getting older, and but birth rates are falling all over the world. And so societies are getting older, and this means that there's a real need to make sure that as people get older, they stay healthy and preferably independent and even more preferably productive. That's good for them as well as for the rest of society. And so there's a lot of government interest and societal interest in doing something about aging. So that's another aspect. And a third motivation is a somewhat negative motivation, which is that because of all of these advances and this interest, and possibly, if I may be a bit cynical as a boomer myself, because the boomer generation is getting older and is worrying about, aging and nearing the end. There's a lot of hype as well. There's all sorts of claims. There's pushes towards radical life extension. So there's this sort of extreme end of the spectrum, which is not just about healthy aging, but really trying to push the boundary of what it might even mean to be human. And so I thought that for all of these reasons, it was an interesting time to write the book. And not surprisingly, virtually every week there's an article about aging in most newspapers or magazines.
Yeah. I want to dig into that a little bit, because you brought up somewhat the economics, right, of aging. In the book, you talk about how, as folks are having fewer children, but older folks are living longer, there are some disparities that arise from all of this. There are concerns about what that's going to do economically too. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more on that.
There's several kinds of disparities. One is economic disparity. Even in England, which has a national health service, the richest 10% live about 10 years longer than the poorest 10%. So that's a big difference. But it's even bigger if you look at healthy years. If you look at healthy years, that difference is almost double. So it means the poor are living not only shorter lives, but more of their lives unhealthy, okay, towards the end of life. And in the US, it's about 15 years instead of 10 because the US, has bigger health disparities. And so this is a real problem. And if you have advances that turn out to be quite expensive, they don't have to be, but they might be. And if they are, then you can imagine that people who are rich will be the people who can afford those advances, and you will increase this disparity even further. Now, coupled with that, there's a generational disparity. As people grow older, they gain money, power, and influence. They all three go together, obviously. And so as they get older, they're just much more powerful and wealthy. So there's a generational disparity. Now, in the past, they would die off, and then things would sort of re-equilibrate, right? But if they just keep on living longer and longer, and fewer people are born, then you will have the same group of people sort of controlling things in society for a very long time. And we live in a world where some of the most powerful nations are led by people in their 70s. Now imagine if those people didn't die, and 50 years from now you had the same people.
Oh my goodness!
Controlling things. So
sounds like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah. So exactly. So I think there are these issues that don't get talked about because longevity is thought of as an unequivocally good thing, and that's because most of us don't really like the idea of growing old and dying. We like our lives. We don't want to really leave it. And even if we may accept it philosophically, nobody wants to die tomorrow or next month or next year. So it is it's something we accept in the abstract, right. But we don't really like to confront it. But what's good for us as individuals isn't necessarily what's good for society. That's the point I'm trying to make.
And you used a couple different terms there, and I want to make sure that we define kind of the difference between longevity, lifespan, life expectancy, because there's some nuance there, right?
Yes, there is. So, for example, life expectancy doubled in the last 150 years. People used to live for 40 years or less on average, and now they live over 80 years. What does that mean? It meant that at birth, if you calculated what are the odds that, of how long you'd live, well, there's a 50% chance you would live to be 40 or something like that, okay?
Right.
And so that was the odds. That's sort of like life expectancy at birth. And that doubled. But that doubling was not because of progress in aging. It had more to do with the fact that we solved a lot of childhood diseases, infectious diseases. We had better sanitation, public health. We had vaccines. We had fertilizers, which allowed us to solve the food supply problem.
Oh, wow.
People weren't living on the edge of starvation like most poor people throughout most of history. And so for all of these reasons, and then of course came antibiotics, and that got us to about 60 or so. And then there was progress in heart disease and diabetes and cancer. So it kept creeping up, and now we, on average, live to be about in our 80s. So that's what you can expect to live at birth. If you're born, you can expect to live to be 85 or so. So that's the life expectancy at birth. But maximum lifespan has to do with how long could you live as a human being if nothing went wrong. Let's say you didn't get cancer, you didn't get any of the diseases of old age, and you're perfectly healthy. How long could you live? That's different. That's more like 110 to 120 years. Nobody has lived more than 122, and only one person has lived beyond 120. So that's sort of the maximum lifespan of our species, 110 to 122. And you have to remember that maximum lifespan may not have changed a whole lot, because even in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance period, Michelangelo lived to be almost 90. He died at the age of 89, which would be a pretty respectable age even today, at a time when life expectancy at birth was only about 40.
Right. Yeah. So I think those terms can get tossed around a little willy-nilly. And I know my own kids talk a lot about the idea that, like, oh, well, everybody died really young, and that's why life expectancy. But it feels like it might be a little more nuanced than some of those sorts of.
No, because even hundreds of years ago, there were people living into their 80s and 90s. And, but of course, 80s or 90s in those days was like 3 generations.
Right.
And so most of their friends would have died off, and people who were born at the same time they were no longer existed. They were outliers in some sense.
Right. And their expectations for their health would have been very different than perhaps someone today.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I don't know about Michelangelo's health in his old age, but it is true that people had, although having said that, I think that in the old days, if you became unhealthy, you tended to just die very quickly. People would get pneumonia and they would simply die.
Right.
Whereas today, you can cure them and keep them alive for much longer. So that's a problem, that we spend a lot of our old age with morbidities.
Right.
Whereas in the old days, those same morbidities would have killed you.
Yeah. As someone who can't eat gluten, I'm pretty sure I would have been among them. John has a really interesting question here. Do you agree with the statement quoted in your book that the first person to live to 150 is now living? And why or why not?
Yeah, so this is a very famous bet in the longevity field between 2 researchers, Stephen Ostad, who studies animals which have unusual lifespan for their size, and Jay Olshansky, who's a demographer who looks at life expectancy and changes in it over a period. And Stephen Ostad, I think, once claimed that the person who will live to be 150 has already been born, and Olshansky bet him that that was not true. Now, of course, neither of them is going to be alive when the bet is settled. So what they did was they put it into a pool, or some sort of trust, I imagine. And the idea is it will just grow an investment, and in 150 years, it could be worth $1 million, which might buy you a few cups of coffee then. But anyway, that's what their bet is. I tend to, well, the argument is not, if we cure all cancer and diabetes and heart disease and dementia, will people live longer? I think the argument is, can we slow down the process of aging itself so that people can live longer? And that's the bet, whether that can happen fast enough to help someone who's already born. And that's where they disagree. And I tend to be on Olshansky's side, which is that I don't think that's true now. I think we will need much bigger advances, and they'll take time. But it is a legitimate area of disagreement.
Yeah. In our group, we had some questions about what really qualifies death. what breakdown in cellular processes would qualify as the death of any particular cell, and how long after death of the human host does it take for a particular cell to be dead, and is human death actually kind of a multi-layered process? So what really qualifies as being dead?
It's multi-layered in some sense, but not in the way we define and perceive death, which has a paradox. So when we talk about death, we mean the end of our existence as a whole individual, as a coherent individual. So if I lose an arm, I'm not dead. My arm may die, wither away and decay and die, but I'm not dead. And also, while I'm alive, millions of cells in us are dying all the time. And some of them are dying by design. I mean, not by design, but you know what I mean? They've evolved to die. And their death actually serves a purpose. And we never notice that. We don't notice all these cells in us dying all the time. And the flip side is that at the moment of our death, most of our cells are still alive, and that's why you can donate your organs to transplant recipients. And so it's this weird paradox. And when we talk about death, we're talking about a particular kind of death. We're not talking about cellular death or even death of a particular tissue. We're talking about the death of the loss of us as a coherent individual. And so it's a kind of systems failure. So if I were to lose an arm, I wouldn't die. But if my heart started to fail, or my kidney started to fail, or my brain started to fail, then I would die, because that will affect the entire system and not just one part of it.
Now, you talk about in the book a couple different cellular processes that may be involved in longevity and lifespan, everything from telomeres to, so I'm kind of curious if you could just give us a brief summary and then kind of point out where you think the most hopefully fruitful area of research as far as longevity may be.
Yeah, so there are two distinct questions. So let me answer your first one to begin with. And so if you look at the processes of aging, they occur at every layer of complexity. So you can think of us as layers of complexity. At the very basic level are molecules inside us. And molecules can get damaged, like DNA can get damaged. And so that itself can be a driver of aging. So that's one very fundamental level. Then you can have the collection of proteins in our body which make our cells work. And that orchestra of proteins can be disrupted if they're not all made at the right time, if they're not disposed of when they're, when they're unfolded or in a dysfunctional form. So there are those levels. Then if you move further on, you get to components of the cell, like organelles, like our mitochondria. These are little organelles in our cells that began life as a bacterium that was swallowed up by a bigger cell about 2 billion years ago. And now the two species sort of coexist, one inside the other, and that's how we evolved. These mitochondria are where our usable form of energy is made from the carbohydrate and food that we ingest and the oxygen we breathe. And they play a central role in cell health. And if those mitochondria get damaged, that also drives aging. And then cells themselves can go into a state called senescence, where in response to stress, they go into the state which is dysfunctional. It won't divide, and at the same time, it secretes inflammatory molecules, which are essentially signaled to the immune system to come and clear them and also clear any damage around the site. And senescent cells play a very important role early in life and actually throughout our lives. But what happens in old age is that's an imbalance. We accumulate too many senescent cells, so we have too much systemic inflammation, which drives the production of even more senescent cells. So it's a vicious cycle. And so that's another source of aging. Now, all of this means that the cells that are responsible for regenerating all our tissues, which are called stem cells, they also decline in number. They also go into senescence, they decline in number, they decline in quality, and that means tissue regeneration becomes a problem, replacing muscle, which is lost, becomes a problem. Everything sort of slowly starts to break down as a result. And other things like communication between cells, which is so important for the immune system, that also breaks down. So we noticed during the COVID pandemic that your chances of dying of COVID doubled every 7 years or 8 years of age. So if you're, 18 years old, you were twice as likely to die as a 10-year-old.
Right.
And so on. And, by the time you reached 80, you were many times more likely to die than a 10-year-old, which is why, old people were, some of the principal, victims of the COVID pandemic. And that's because, they have more inflammation, and COVID, in fact, also triggered inflammation, but their immune system also was not as good as a young person.
Right.
So you can see that there isn't a single point for driving aging. It really affects the system at many different layers of complexity. Now, you asked what are the most promising approaches to that? Well, virtually every one of these could be a target for aging. So, for example, the way that the body controls recycling of bad proteins and bad components is called autophagy. And you can drive up autophagy by reducing by a pathway called the TOR pathway, which also reduces global protein synthesis. So there's a major metabolic pathway that can help with some of the issues with aging. Now, early in life, you don't want that. You want to be able to make lots of protein, and you want to make, you don't want autophagy to be too active, because you want proteins to be made and used. And so what's good for us early in life is not necessarily good for us late in life. And this has to do with the way aging evolved. And aging did not, evolution doesn't care about how long you live. It doesn't care at all about that. It only cares about fitness.
Right.
And fitness is not physical fitness, but it's the ability to pass on your genes. Okay, that's all evolution is acting on, is the survival of your genes, which genes survive and therefore get selected. And so anything that helps you mature quickly, reproduce, and pass on your genes is selected for, even if it's harmful later in life.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Right.
And that's a general problem. And you come across that over and over again in the biology of aging. Things, for example, that might prevent cancer early in life may cause aging later in life, including, loss of telomeres. Telomere loss and cellular senescence may have evolved as an anti-cancer mechanism to prevent most of our cells from being able to proliferate indefinitely. So you reduce the cancer risk to the individual, but the result is that you cause senescence and you cause aging later in life.
Right. So yeah, you bring up a lot, that there's quite a balance. And
yeah, so all of these pathways potentially can be targets for anti-aging research.
Gotcha. And we have a lot of questions coming in about what some of those possibilities might be. Danita from our group, for example, asks, will the new technologies that are being developed prolong life be viable when we still have to deal with increasing toxins in our environment, disruptors and stress from everyday life? And isn't that going to end up playing a larger part in our health deteriorating quicker than it may have a couple generations ago?
That is true, but I think it's a kind of, they're somewhat independent in that you can work to reduce, to improve the environment. And for example, I would argue that in the 60s and possibly 70s, things were actually worse. You know,
Right.
we had acid rain, we had no emission standards, you know, and we're actually somewhat better now than we, you know, Lake Erie. I remember I was in Ohio. I went to graduate school in Ohio. Lake Erie was basically, you know, a horrible place, you know, and the Cuyahoga River once caught fire. Okay, so that doesn't happen now, which means that in many ways we've actually improved the environment. So we can do that, and at the same time, we can improve some of the biological aspects of aging by understanding what happens.
Sherry, who's here today, had this. Do you see an equalization, speaking of balance, between living a long time and living well for a long time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one thing that biologists call is an idea they have is called compression of morbidity. Compression of morbidity has to do with the following. You look at the number of years you live, and you look at the number of healthy years you live, and the difference is that period of morbidity when we are suffer from various illnesses, typically of old age, frailty, and diseases of various kinds. And what you want to do is compress that period to as short as possible so that you're living an extremely healthy life and you have a rapid decline at the very end before you die. Now, that would mean that as you get older, you continue to try and live healthily for as much as possible. Now, we've been very good at extending lifespan in the last few decades, but the period of morbidity has not actually shortened. You know, so we have not actually shortened the number of years that we live in poor health. If anything, we've increased it somewhat.
Right.
And this is why, you know, people normally, unfortunately, we tend to sort of segregate old people away from the rest of society. They're all in these retirement homes and nursing homes and so on. But we became aware of them in the pandemic and how, you know,
oh yes,
would sort of ravage many of these nursing homes. And so the fact is, more and more of our society is spending lots of years in care homes like that. And so the hope is to be able to shorten that. Whether we can shorten is not clear. And the reason I say that is, if we improve health, you know, why would we then suddenly decline and die? Maybe we'll simply postpone that period of decline to a later time, and then we'll have maybe an even slower decline. So I think this is something that people have not actually thought through, and everybody takes it. It's almost a dogma in the field, though we're going to compress morbidity and increase health span. I don't think people really know whether we can do it or not.
Right. And I want to acknowledge Audrey's question in the chat, who mentioned that her husband died at 85 after suffering from Parkinson's, and so his quality of life for those last 4 years weren't very good. And you talk a lot about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and these kinds of diseases, what we might learn from them. But you know, she mentioned, you know, why would one want to live to an old age when your friends are gone and you're suffering with these kinds of conditions?
Yeah, I think no serious aging researcher, I should say longevity researcher, because aging researcher means a scientist is getting older. Anyway, but no serious longevity researcher wants to extend life in poor health. Okay, that is not the goal. We are doing that with medicine. We're keeping people alive no matter what their health. Okay, that is a sort of, that is medical practice, modern medical practice. But I think the people who are working on longevity really want to try and see if they can improve health in old age and keep people healthier and not suffering. That's not the goal.
Right.
But as I pointed out, we may keep people healthier longer, but at the very end, we may still have that period of decline when people will not be in great shape. And that's an unsolved question in my mind. Although if you talk to other, perhaps more optimistic researchers, they may say that I'm unduly pessimistic, but anyway, there we are.
We have a number of questions too, like this one from Master JD. What keeps the brain healthy? What of the claim that lemon, olive oil, ginger drink keeps the gut and digestive system healthy? So there's a lot of talk about supplements. There were discussions about protein supplements. Do these work?
It is, it is very odd. I'll tell you a paradox.
Okay.
So one of the drugs that one of the mechanisms for living longer is called caloric restriction. So if you restrict the number of calories you take to a bare minimum, then chances are you will live a little longer and you'll be somewhat healthier. But you might also be more prone to infections. You might feel cold. You might have loss of libido. You might have other side effects. Okay, so nothing. I find this in many of these things. There's no free lunch. But anyway, caloric restriction is considered one of the things that works reliably, at least in animals of different species. And they work by affecting a pathway called the TOR pathway. And one of the effects is to slow down or inhibit protein synthesis. So if you're taking a lot of protein supplements, I don't know quite how that jives with it. But on the other hand, one other problem with aging is loss of muscle mass, and that's a real problem because you want to maintain muscle mass as you get older. And so the field is full of some of these paradoxes. Now, to get to the person's question, what keeps the brain healthy? I think the brain is not fundamentally different from other organs in that it's also made of cells. The same things that cause your liver to age or your heart to age will also cause your brain to age. And the things that will benefit it, like maintaining a healthy weight, doing exercise, eating well, sleeping sufficiently, all those things will affect your brain as well as the rest of your body. I don't think the brain is fundamentally different from the rest of the body as far as aging goes, but it manifests itself in different ways in that you can get these neuro diseases of, like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, which are unique to the brain.
Also, I guess this is kind of along those same lines. There's been research into procyanin, which I guess is from grapeseed. You talk in the book about a number of things like resveratrol and all these natural compounds, trying to tweak them out. Again, in that idea of supplementation, none of them seem to be like.
No, they tried. The NIH tried a number of supplements, including I think turmeric, curcumin, which is the ingredient in turmeric, resveratrol, a whole bunch of these things. I think green tea extracts and so on, and they don't seem to do a lot. And part of the reason is that we're living in a time where nutrients are plentiful, and typically we're getting the nutrition that we need. And the real problem we have is we're consuming too much. And we have a problem with obesity, and that's a much more serious problem. If we were to control that, we would gain far more in terms of healthy aging
Right.
than we would, I think, with many of these supplements.
Thank you for that. Now, there's a lot of public and commercial interest in longevity.
Yeah, I have to tell you, the supplement business is billions of dollars.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book.
Yeah.
So, where can one go for good resources? What are some good go-to sites, or how can you evaluate information to make sure that what you're getting is actually good, scientifically based evidence-based
I think
information?
this is a general problem in today's society because information has become extremely fragmented.
Right.
As a result of the internet and social media and so on. And what I've tried to do in my book is to give people an understanding of the fundamental biology of aging. Okay.
Right.
And it's not a recipe book that, do this.
Right.
Well, I have some very general recipes, which are diet, exercise, and sleep. Okay,
Right.
these are 3 things that we could do ourselves that would help us more than any supplement on the market today, and any therapeutic actually on the market today. But the thing that you could do is, if you understand the fundamental biology of aging, then you can ask about a particular supplement. How does this affect what I know about aging? What is the evidence? What aspect of aging does it affect, and how do we know? And that gives you a very kind of not skeptical, but a very rational view for how to evaluate supplements or any new, they don't have to be natural supplements. They could be some drug put out by a pharma company, based on research. They could be all sorts of things. And you should be able to evaluate that. How do we know? What's the evidence? I think that's the way to look at it. Because otherwise, you just have a multiplicity of claims on the internet. And I would ask, not what the seller says about a supplement, but what do people say who have no skin in the game? Is there any
Right.
neutral party that has evaluated it?
Right. We brought up the longevity industry. What are some of your biggest concerns about this industry and the rush to market of some of these anti-aging technologies? I know that there are tech billionaires and a lot of focus on things like AI, trying to use that to tweak all these systems.
Well, I recently read a report that tech billionaires are funding new companies for genome modification, which will initially for eliminating genetic diseases, but eventually they might want genetic enhancement. Maybe it'd be better to be a little bit taller, maybe a little bit smarter. So there's all sorts of ideas there which are slightly just worrying, and that they may create a 2-tier class of society: those who are genetically enhanced and those who are not. And the same technology can also be applied eventually to increasing longevity. So you could see where this is going. And not surprisingly, these are also the same people pushing AI and the use of AI for improvements in biology. So you can see they're pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human. That's what they want to do. Right. And we don't know whether that is going to result in a good place or not. So far, their track record isn't so great. I mean, all of their social media has really created a lot of polarization and dysfunctional society. So I'm a little skeptical about where this is all going to lead.
I think that's a good point. Kind of coming back to maybe those diet, exercise, sleep. Marcia wanted to know, what kinds of exercises would you recommend? What should people be doing?
That's a very good question. My view is that it should be a mixture of cardiovascular exercise to keep your heart and your uh, blood system in good shape, your arteries and your heart in good shape, and at the same time to do resistance exercise so that you maintain your strength and muscle mass, including things like your grip, your upper body strength, which gives you better balance, your also, but you know, also your legs and you know, other muscles, so that you don't suffer from frailty, which is another problem with old age, is loss of muscle mass, the tendency to fall, not being able to lift things. I think those are all problems as we age. So combining, you know, weight training or resistance exercises with cardiovascular exercises is probably a good thing. Cardiovascular could be anything you enjoy. I can't run anymore, but I cycle, or you can swim if you like, or you can walk at a brisk pace. So there are many ways to get that.
Thanks. And I no one specifically asked, but you mentioned sleep. What is the role of sleep when it comes to
Yeah,
longevity?
there's a great book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep,
Oh,
and it really points out how important sleep is in human physiology and the physiology of all animals, actually, even very, very simple animals sleep. It's not just restricted to people with a large brain and eyes and so on. So sleep is interesting because during the sleep cycle is when the organism repairs a lot of damage and recycles a lot of the garbage
right.
that it accumulates just during the process of living. And so it's extremely important for good health and also for aging. And also sleep means you're not tired. And if you're not tired, you don't tend to eat, you know, in a
Right.
stressful way. You can maintain good habits. And, you know, when I said diet, exercise, and sleep, they're all synergistic. They support each other. For example, if you exercise, you're more likely to be relaxed. You're more likely to sleep better, and
Right.
and so on. So they all feed into each other.
This is kind of an interesting question from Catherine. Are there any brain exercises that help with cognition? Again, that idea of making those years count.
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a
Fair.
neuroscientist, so
Right.
I can only tell you what I've read. So this is not firsthand. You know, don't you know, my word is as good as anybody else's. Okay. What I've read is that if you do things like puzzles, it only makes you better at doing puzzles because it's a very focused, narrow skill.
Hmm.
Okay. But there are other skills which use a much broader section of our brain. And one of them is music, especially playing music with other people, like
Oh,
chamber music or things like that. Another is learning languages, because in language you have to process things very quickly and respond very quickly. So perhaps you're firing, you know, a lot more, you know, of your brain. So there are, I mean, this is something you know, the person could actually look up, or all of you could look up. There are some things which actually uh, use more of our brain power than others, and those are the ones perhaps worth pursuing.
well, as we come to the end here, I have one final question for you. After immersing yourself in this topic of the science of aging and death for this book, has it changed your perspective on aging or longevity? And
Um,
yeah,
well, you know, one thing I went into was the idea that maybe our lifespan was a result of evolution killing us off to make room for a new generation. Okay. And that idea is not correct. Okay. It's really evolution doesn't care. Some species live a very long time, other species live a very short time. And it has to do with this balance between fitness and lifespan. And it's optimizing for your ability to produce offspring. So that's something new that I had to really reckon with. In terms of my own life, it's changed very little because I was already doing as much as I could of, living a reasonable lifestyle, although I have a sweet tooth, which I can't seem to overcome. But nevertheless, I haven't changed very much in that respect. But it's given me a real appreciation, though, of the process of aging, and maybe it's made me realize that, look, we should accept aging as a process in life. Maybe we'll be able to do something about it, but even if we don't, we can try to live as healthily as possible by taking some matters into our own hands. I think that's probably, it's not a great, not a profound insight, but I do think that in the next few years, maybe in the next decade or so, we will come up with things that allow us to age more healthily. I think that's much more likely than living a very long time.
So there aren't any huge changes that you've made to your own
no, I think
day to day.
I don't think so. I'm a vegetarian, but you don't have to be a vegetarian to eat a healthy diet. And I bicycle 6 or 7 miles a day. So it's not that I can do something much more. I guess what my wife would say is that I can not have my phone next to my bed, and that would improve my sleep a lot. And maybe
I'm working on that one. I'm working on that one too. So what do you hope that people take away after reading this book?
I think what they could go away with, I think understanding why we age and how we age gives us better tools for how to live. Because if we know what are the things that cause aging, we can also do the things that would help us, with that process. So, and it will also help us to evaluate new things, new discoveries about aging, new claims about aging.
Right.
And so I think it's really an understanding gives you the tools to deal with it. So I think that's what I hope people take away from the book.
That's about the end of our time together. So Dr. Ramakrishnan, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If there are any resources that you want to shout out, or further readings, or just last minute tips you want to give anybody, this is your time.
No, I think I've said as much as I could.
Well, thank you so much for taking time with us today. Everyone, we are going to continue discussing this book in our community group on Mighty Networks. We've got a couple more weeks of discussion questions. The conversation has been amazing this month. So many great points, so many great queries. And then next month, we'll be reading, and I should know this, the next month is reading The Biggest Questions in the Universe by Sean Carroll. That's what we'll be reading all throughout December. So make sure that you join us for that book. We are doing a giveaway right now, so you can win a copy. And of course, we will be back in December with another live stream with another author. Thank you to everyone who showed up today, who had wonderful questions. This was a great conversation. I'm very thankful for the book club and for your time, Venki. And for our moderator, Taylor, who is in the background, always keeping things flowing along well. Have a great afternoon, and thank you again for being here. Take care, everyone.